There was a time when paying usually ended the transaction because once the receipts had paid, the product went home with you and the seller no longer needed to remain involved. The book, disc, cartridge, or software box went onto your shelf, leaving the seller with your money and you with the copy. Now imagine placing that same shelf inside an account where the album is visible, the game is listed, and the software is installed, yet none of them exists entirely apart from the system through which you receive them. Behind that shelf are accounts, license checks, servers, and sometimes another payment, each forming part of a connection that can continue long after the original transaction. Change one of those connections, and the product can remain directly in front of you while your access to it disappears. So when did buying stop meaning owning? What changed was not payment itself, but the relationship that continued after payment. Digital distribution allowed companies to remain technically connected to products after the transaction. Recurring revenue made that continuing relationship commercially valuable, and convenience made customers willing to accept it. Payment was no longer necessarily the end of the relationship, because the provider could remain present in what happened next. This is the gradual shift from ownership to access. To understand what changed, we first have to be precise about what people actually owned before digital distribution altered the shape of the transaction. Buying a film on disc never gave you its copyright, but it did give you a particular copy that could exist independently of the shop where you bought it. You could keep that copy, lend it, sell it, or leave it untouched for years without asking the original seller to approve each use. That independence came partly from the nature of the object itself, because a physical copy can move from one person to another without requiring the seller to remain connected to the exchange. A digital transfer usually creates a second copy, however, which means the original has to be removed or disabled separately if the transfer is meant to resemble a movement of a physical object. That difference made it easier for the seller to remain inside the transaction even after the product had reached the customer, because the transfer could still depend on systems controlled elsewhere. The copy could arrive in your hands, but the company could remain connected to what happened next. Once that continuing relationship became technically possible, companies had a clear reason to keep it alive. A traditional sale produces one payment, after which the company needs another product, another upgrade, or another sequel if it wants to generate another sale from the same customer. A subscription changes that pattern by turning a single spike in revenue into a continuing stream of payments. It also creates measurable signals, including active customers, renewals, cancellations, and expected revenue, which can make the business easier to understand from one period to the next. None of that guarantees success, but it can make the future easier to forecast. Adobe made this transition unusually visible in its own business reporting, where the reasoning behind the shift appeared alongside the financial consequences. In its filings, the company described moving customers towards subscriptions, increasing recurring revenue, and making the business more predictable. That detail matters because predictability was not merely an accidental result of the transition, but part of the strategy that made the model attractive. Customers also gained faster updates, cloud services, and new capabilities through the same arrangement, which meant the subscription could deliver real value while keeping the payment relationship open. This is why subscriptions are not automatically a bad bargain, and why the issue cannot be reduced to the simple claim that repeated payment is always unfair. Some products genuinely require continuing work because servers must run, storage must be maintained, security must be updated, and support, collaboration, and regular development do not happen only once. Microsoft still sells Office as both a one-time product and a subscription, with the subscription including continuing services that distinguish it from the one-time offer. These are genuinely different bargains, even when the products appear similar from the outside. The useful question then is not simply whether a product requires repeated payment, but what continuing work that repeated payment is actually funding. The relationship becomes harder to recognize when the interface speaks the language of ownership while the system underneath speaks the language of permission. You choose the product, see a price, and press a button labeled Buy, following a sequence that closely resembles an ordinary purchase. Beneath that familiar surface, however, a different arrangement may be waiting, one in which the customer receives permission to use the product rather than an independent copy of it. The button says Buy. The system says License. Music streaming shows why this trade was so easy for customers to accept, because one payment can open a catalog larger than most people could ever collect, with access available across several devices. For many listeners, that kind of access is more useful than buying albums individually, especially when convenience matters more than building a permanent collection. A catalog, however, is not the same thing as a personal collection, because a copy generally stays where you put it, while a catalog can change around you. Songs can disappear, and when the subscription ends, the library does not follow you, because it was never transferred to you in the first place. Game platforms add even more layers to the same relationship, combining the product with accounts, software, networks, and continuing technical services. Steam's agreement says that its content and services are licensed, not sold. Access can depend on an account, client software, a license check, an internet connection, or a server, depending on how the particular product is delivered and maintained. Those layers are not only restrictions, because they can also provide real value to the customer by making functions possible that an isolated copy could not provide on its own. The account identifies you, the client runs the game, the license check verifies access, and the server can deliver updates, multiplayer, or the product itself. At the same time, each additional layer creates another place where access can stop, because the path between payment and use now passes through systems that remain under someone else's control. Your account can remain active and the software can stay installed while the product itself still becomes unavailable. Every layer can provide value, but every layer can also become a point of control. Sometimes that control reaches beyond the digital library and into a physical object that appears at first to belong entirely to the customer. HP Instant Ink supplies cartridges through a subscription, and after cancellation, those cartridges stop working at the end of the billing cycle. The printer itself does not become useless, because standard replacement cartridges can keep it working after the subscription cartridges are no longer active. You own the machine, but part of the experience still depends on permission from a service outside it. That dependency becomes even clearer when the product exists on remote infrastructure, where the customer never possesses the system required to make the product function. Google Stadia allowed customers to build game libraries inside a cloud platform, but Google closed the service and its servers in January 2023. Eligible games, add-ons, and much of the hardware were refunded, so the company did not simply keep the money after ending the service. The refund nevertheless revealed the limit of access, because reversing the payment could not preserve the platform itself or transfer its operation into the customer's hands. The money could return, but the platform, the community, and the experience could not be preserved by the customer. A refund can reverse a payment, but it cannot preserve a product. This is one reason game preservation became a public issue rather than remaining a private dispute between individual customers and individual companies. The European Stop Destroying Video Games initiative gathered more than 1.29 million verified statements of support. Its core demand was straightforward: a game sold to consumers should not become remotely unusable when support ends. The principle may sound simple, but the solution is considerably more complicated, because not every game depends on the same systems or can be preserved in the same way. Some games can receive an offline mode, as Ubisoft demonstrated by adding one to The Crew 2 and preserving core content while leaving online features behind. Other games depend on multiplayer populations, licensed material, anti-cheat systems, or remote computation, which can make full preservation more difficult or change what preservation would realistically mean. The European Commission said it could not yet require every game to remain playable forever, but moved towards further discussion and possible end-of-life standards. The question is therefore not whether every service must continue indefinitely, or whether every game can remain completely functional in its original form. The question is whether ending a service must also erase everything the customer paid to access. This is where the meaning of ownership becomes most visible, because the object, software, or receipt can remain, while the practical ability to use the product disappears. The product can remain installed, the device can sit on your desk, and the receipt can still say paid. Somewhere else, however, an account, a server, a cartridge status, or a license can still answer the final question. Yes, you may use it, or no, you may not. The deepest loss is not always the object itself, but independence from the provider. Access can still be cheaper, more convenient, and more capable than possession, particularly when the value of the product depends on services that must continue after the original transaction. It can provide updates, storage, support, and catalogs that no individual could reasonably build alone, while spreading the cost of those services across time. Subscriptions are not simply the opposite of ownership, because they represent a different kind of bargain with different benefits, dependencies, and risks. That bargain is strongest when a company must continue doing meaningful work to provide the service, maintain its infrastructure, or deliver functions that would otherwise disappear. It is weakest when the only thing being maintained is permission. 4 questions can reveal what kind of bargain a customer is being offered, and how much of the product will remain independent of the company after payment. What continuing service is being provided, and what work does it require from the company? What continues to function when the payment ends? What depends on an account, server, license check, or some other form of remote permission? And what happens if the provider changes the terms or closes the service entirely? The answers will differ across products, but they should not all be hidden behind the same word: buy. A fairer system does not require every digital product to last forever, but it does require a clear description of what the customer receives and what will remain if the continuing relationship ends. A purchase, a license, and temporary access should not be presented as though they mean the same thing, because each gives the customer a different degree of control and independence. Functions that do not genuinely require the provider should remain usable where possible, rather than disappearing simply because an unrelated service has ended. When a service ends, there should also be a reasonable exit, whether that means an offline mode, a transfer, a migration, a refund, or enough warning to understand what will disappear. Different products can offer different bargains, but their dependencies should be visible before payment rather than discovered only when something stops working. Subscriptions can be worth paying for, and access can sometimes be better than possession, especially when the provider is genuinely supplying something that must continue. Convenience, however, should not be allowed to hide control. If this investigation helped you see the systems behind an ordinary purchase differently, consider liking the video and subscribing for more documentaries about the structures shaping everyday life. We should know what we are buying, what remains when we stop paying, and what happens when the company ends the service. Because when payment no longer ends the relationship, ownership is not defined by the receipt. It is defined by who still has the power to say no.